Recently, Nigel Farage did an interview with Stephen Edgington, who is very good. And
he appeared on our election coverage.
He did indeed.
Lovely chap.
And he asked him about mass deportations. And let's listen to what Farage has to say about this. And then I'll be going on about how it's possible, how it can be done, my plan of how to do it, and also giving you a case study, particularly a profile on Somalians in Britain, for why there's a good case for it in the first place. Because there are certain people from certain places that clearly do not contribute to the host nation.
We're talking about the Bamalian social housing.
Yes.
Yeah, good.
So here we are with Farage.
No. Yeah, I'm not going to get dragged down the route of mass deportations or anything like that.
Do you support mass deportations?
Well, if people come illegally, they should not be allowed to stay. Simple as. Simple as. And the only way you're ever going to solve the channel, and boy, have a look at the last 3 days. 500 odd on Friday, 800 on Saturday, nearly 300 yesterday. I mean, the numbers are just exploding. These young men that are coming, and unless they know that, number one, they'll never be granted refugee status by coming via this route, that number two, they're not going to stay, they'll keep coming. It's dead simple. Doesn't matter what you do to the gangs. I mean, you could give it, you could give these gang members life imprisonment, but the more people are going to step in to the gap because of the money involved. I mean, look, think about drugs. However big a sentences we give to drug dealers, there's always somebody else.
All the while, ahead of this a little bit. It's like a lot of this was talked about yesterday with
major fault line in British politics. To the House of Commons.
Can you just pause it for a moment?
Of course.
That argument that he used, well, somebody's always going to fill in the gap, aren't they? Well, there's a man who runs a country in Central America named Bukele who has an amazing idea that turns out that if you do just lock all of them up, and then if anybody else pops up to fill the place, you lock them up as well. Eventually, you run out of people willing to get locked up for no profit.
Yeah, it turns out if you make the incentive to commit crime much, much weaker by making the punishment outweigh the profitability of it, perhaps if you're a sort of criminal gang where you're using lethal force and ferrying across Class A drugs, like heroin and things like that, I think there's a case for the death penalty there, isn't there? I would say. And so the notion that being alive or not is not an incentive to not do these things is strange.
Like they're standing at the gallows and they'll go, haha, joke's on you, someone will just take my place. Ack.
Aside from the human trafficking element, there's also the persistent myth that the people coming across on the boats are refugees. Or at least attempting to claim refugee status. A large number of them, if they're caught once they're in the UK, try to claim asylum. But most of the people who are trying to claim asylum or refugee status can do so from France already. And if you wanted to make the journey across and turn yourself in, so to speak, in order to claim asylum or refugee status, the ferry from Calais to Dover is £30, as opposed to what these people are doing, which is paying many thousands of pounds in order to enter the UK legally. They're actually not hoping to claim asylum. They're hoping you'll never catch them. Mm-hmm. They're hoping that they'll get away, be able to travel across country. They'll either be met by family who've already made it across here, whether legally or otherwise. They will be parachuted into an ethnic enclave where they'll be able to find work because they're amongst their own people without coming to the attention of the authorities. And this is also why this is big business within the UK as well, because the people who are hiring these foreign migrant workers are not going to pay them the UK living wage because they're not going to have any paperwork, they're not going to have any documentation, and you'll find that actually businesses such as these dark kitchens, Deliveroo kitchens, or in fact Deliveroo and
barbershops
and things like
we
that.
covered one that actually happened in Swindon a few months
Yeah,
ago.
that's right. They're
we?
making fake IDs for them to work in a barber shop, weren't they?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. They were being housed in the floor above the barber shop, and they were being forced to pay through the nose to rent out the chair that they were using as well. So it was a circular economy within that one shop.
People have less of a sense of disgust over this because it's not, say, Chinese sex workers being trafficked across and then being told in order to pay us back you have to work in whatever dodgy massage parlor or whatever.
Sorry, the politically correct term is whore.
Sure.
But
yeah.
the illegal side of it, I don't necessarily want to focus on because,
Okay.
of course, the illegals have got to go. I mean, I feel like most of the British right is on board with this, right? Even some of the wets on the right are going along with this. But more generally speaking, I want to set up a blueprint for all countries to do mass migration because I think that there is a good case for it. We don't need to get bogged down in the weeds of who's doing what and why. It's our country. We can do what we want with it, in my opinion. And to sort of explain Farage in the interest of time, he says it's impossible to have mass deportations, but then he says we've got to stop the illegal migration, and he says then qualifies saying it's politically impossible. So what I think he's doing, and he also says about how if he agreed to it, it would follow him around for 20 years. I think what he's potentially doing here is one of two things. He's either saying, one, I don't want to alienate my voter base who do want this, and so I don't want to be seen as not saying it, but I'll say, here's why I'm not saying it. Or two, he's trying not to invite controversy so he can move the Overton window.
The difficulty he exists within the parliamentary system now. He's an MP, and so I do understand that he's got to exist within the acceptable range of conversation.
No.
In his own mind.
No, well, perhaps, but the fact that he's an MP gives him way more protection than he had as the leader of a party with no seats. In fact, he can't be fired by Keir Starmer unless he calls another general election, and he's not going to do that at a period where he's at his lowest ever popularity. And so really, Farage should be leaning into this. You look at the wave of support for similar policy across Europe. I'm thinking of Poland, of Italy, Germany, etc. And what you're seeing is that it's becoming popular, and then it comes into the collective consciousness of the public. When you have teenage girls dancing along and smiling to Auslander Raus in, on TikTok or whatever, it shows that it's become something where there's this kind of status associated with it. And so, really, all it's waiting for is for him to embrace this moment and go, yes, mass remigration, and suddenly the surge of support will actually be huge.
This is absolutely true, but Farage has always been afraid and tried to evade the accusations of racism, and he probably sees mass deportation as a potentially racist
Farage is
policy.
not the point of discussion. This was just a jumping off
intro,
point.
Sure.
Yes, and so yes, he's alluded to these things, but I think that there's some debate about whether he's silently in support of it or not. Who knows? I don't know what's going on in his head. I'm sure lots of people will have an opinion, but we've been talking about mass migration for a long time. Here's an article from Bo of June of 2022. Mass remigration is inevitable, which I wholeheartedly agree with, very much so. And also, it's worth mentioning, we do have a magazine. If you want to support what we're doing, please buy this magazine. It helps us keep going because we're, of course, funded entirely by our audience. And so if you buy this wonderful magazine, which has lots of good writers in, like Carl Benjamin, you might have heard of that guy, Dr. Nima Parvini, academic agent, Morgoth's Review, Dr. Charles Cornish-Dale, that's Rorig Nationalist, Marcus Follin, Dave Green, the distributist, Stefan Molyneux, to name a few. So there's some great stuff in there. There's some other people in there as well, as a bit of a surprise. And it's only available to buy for a limited time, along with some of the merch as well. We've got Associated Islander merch that's only available for a couple of weeks, so get it while you still can, because it will be gone, and we'll be moving on to the next issue. But anyway, with that out of the way, I wanted to have a quick look at one ethnicity in Britain specifically, to use as an example of why these sorts of things are inevitable. And it's worth mentioning, the Somalis, pretty unfortunate group of people, because, one of the most dangerous countries in the world, Somalia. And yes, I'm sure Carl will want to make me emphasise the point that not all Somalis are the same. Judge everyone individually. Connor's working with Ayan Hirsi Ali, who is Somalian, and she's supposedly on side politically, according to Connor. And so, lots of people are different. I'm not talking in generalities. However, if you look at social housing, look at all the different ethnicities and who is taking up social housing. For those unaware, this is sort of housing owned by local councils, the local governments, and then rented at a lower price to people. You look at Somalis, and there you go, 72% in social housing in Britain, which is ridiculous. We're importing people over, supposedly to help the economy, which doesn't make sense. And yes, they're not helping whatsoever. This is ridiculous. Massively overrepresented compared to other people. You've also got Jamaicans and Ghanaians and people like that who are overrepresented as well.
But even compared to Jamaican, Somalians are over 30% more.
Exactly.
And look at the Aussies. Noble Aussies keeping this country upright on their backs.
Exactly. And so things like this, obviously this is costing taxpayers a lot because this is subsidised by taxpayers. And then you look at things like qualifications. So the black line on these graphs is the sort of rest of England and Wales, and the blue bars are the Somalis. So no qualifications, massively overrepresented here for no qualifications. And then you get to the higher level qualifications. Some of the younger people tend to keep to the average. A lot of students, I think. But you can see here, they're not filling these high level positions because the native population far exceeds that of the Somalis. So the notion that they're occupying important jobs is not the case. Actually, it seems like they've got, on average, very low level qualifications, sort of entry level at the very least.
It's serving Pret.
It's also notable that a student who manages to come over here and get a student visa, once they've qualified, assuming that they manage to find employment, can bring across multiple dependents who are going to be in those upper age categories and will not have the qualifications, may not speak any English, and are not contributing to society.
It's also worth mentioning as well, a lot of these low-skill jobs in the future are going to be occupied by AI and machines. Everything's going to be mechanized eventually. And so why do we need Somalis doing these things when in a few years' time it could potentially be, a robot pouring your coffee in Pret?
I wouldn't even go that far. I would still say that we have an unemployment epidemic that's happened over here for native children. Native young people, I should say, who deserve the opportunity to take a summer job, who should be able to find work and to progress by getting a little bit of savings and then perhaps going to the career that they desire, and absorbing, and not to mention that pensioners as well, who want a bit of extra cash on top of their pension, should be able to have the opportunity to work in sort of low-skilled environments where it's a part-time affair.
Well, what they're doing effectively is just taking the jobs of our teenagers, and it's making it harder for people to get on, into the job market, which is silly. And also, if there are job vacancies, actually that's a sign of a healthy economy because that pushes wages up. It's not actually something that needs to be filled, and the whole paradigm is just wrong. So here is their economic activity. So if you could zoom out a little bit there, Samson. So they are less likely to be employed, 34.1% compared to 59.6% of England and Wales' population, or self-employed, 8.5% compared to 11.3%, and more likely to be economically inactive, 47.1% compared to 24.7% of England and Wales. And it's also worth mentioning the rest of England and Wales also includes other immigrant populations that are less productive than the native population. So if we're comparing that against the native population, that disparity is going to be even greater. But look at this.
So less than half of them are even employed, because economically inactive is always one of the fun ways that the government tries to hide the unemployment rate.
So a lot of them are students, a disproportionate number, about, 22, 23%, something like that there, which is just a drain, really, because, we, as a state, put a lot of money into education, and a lot of the time it doesn't actually pay off at a statewide investment.
I'm curious whether or not, how are they funding this, right? Because if they're qualifying for UK student loans, then that's insane. And you wouldn't expect that Somalia, being a very poor nation, would have a huge population of people with the funds to pay our foreign student fees.
Well, it's obviously money that's been coerced from the native population to pay for these people to go to university.
Or just printed.
Yeah, all that. But either way, it's pretty obvious to me that they're not contributing their fair share economically. And in fact, you can see that pretty starkly. Here's OBR data here. So low-wage migrant workers in their lifespan never contribute to the economy whatsoever. There's no point them being here. I mean, even sort of, your average UK resident, they sort of drain for a little bit, and then they contribute in their working life, and then they're a pensioner again. That's bad enough as is. We don't need people who are just dependents the whole time. Even your sort of average wage migrant worker, they work. This is, of course, not including their education years. So we're assuming they come over educated, which isn't always the case. So there might actually be another dip here. But, they contribute, and then in retirement, for some reason, then they stop contributing at 92 for whatever reason. That seems a bit strange.
Yeah, I'm very curious about why the statistic on this graph actually starts at 25 for the migrant workers. I know.
You know why.
But it's obviously going to be well below, isn't it? There's going to be much lower than simply the line here. So the only case where it's economically beneficial is the high-wage migrant worker, which Somalis obviously don't occupy because we've looked at their level of qualification, we've looked at their economic contribution. I've also looked at the areas in which they're working in. I think half of them are in low-skilled employment, which is this one, where they never contribute.
Yeah, this is the other thing which isn't really represented on this graph. You've got the three variants of migrant worker, but the actual population densities within each of those isn't represented.
Yeah, I think a lot of them are weighted towards the lower end.
And the difference between EEA and non-EEA migrants is also...
And that's European Union.
And also starting them all out at 0 when they're at 25 years old is also...
not very accurate, yes. But even with this data, we can make a pretty resounding conclusion about, well, hang on a minute, if they're not highly qualified, they're not bringing anything to the country. It is obvious that this is the case. And let's go to Denmark.
Sorry, but if you're a high-wage migrant worker, how even at 100 are you still putting into the system more than you're taking?
Yes, it's a bit silly.
Ridiculous.
Anyway, going to Denmark, because they collect very good data. This is a quote from this article. Male Somali descendants, even when the figures are adjusted for age and family income, are convicted of violence 3.6 times as often as the average man in Denmark of the same age and family income. So you know how the left loves to say, oh, well, it's not about culture or ethnicity, it's about poverty. Well, even when it's adjusted, they're 3.6 times more likely to be violent. You don't adjust it for poverty, then it's probably going to be even more. And I don't think it matters if you're being assaulted, whether that person is rich or poor. The punches still hurt the same, right? The stab wounds still hurt. It doesn't matter. I don't care. I don't want any criminals in the country, and any way of solving it is good for me. So... this has finally... actually, I've got this as well. So the Danish data...
Sorry, Josh is taking the whole... Well, Pinochet was technically a libertarian tract. Is that how you're justifying it to yourself?
Something like that. But anyway, here's some more Danish data. So look at that. Somalia, right at the top of violent crime conviction there, after Kuwait, Tunisia, and Lebanon, then Somalia. And if we scroll down a little bit... here are the European countries. So look at how much less prone to violent crime Europeans are compared to Somalis. So it's basically the Middle East and Africa are overrepresented. There are some other countries as well, Asiatic countries. There are also countries like Yugoslavia here, which obviously don't exist anymore.
They don't understand us, they don't want to understand us, they won't integrate, and they commit crime.
Yes. So they cost us lots of money. They don't really contribute to our society, they don't integrate, and they're being violent towards us. I think that's good enough reason to send them home. And I think that lots of people are now starting to realise, this is a YouGov poll, a recent one. This was from the 9th of September 2024. Do immigrants from Somalia make a positive or negative contribution to life in Britain today? And now 37%, think they make a negative contribution, which is pretty high relative to the other ones. I think the next best one is I don't know, which, fair enough. Not everyone is, trawling through ethnic crime data
or watching this podcast, but they should be.
They should be. But positive contribution is only at 18%, and that's got to be what your average Labour voter, your sort of diehard left-winger, right? But the rest is, I don't know, or obviously it's negative, which is true. And I have some solutions to this, and I wanted to talk about how to do it, because we talk about all the problems, we don't talk about how to solve it. And I have a 5-stage policy proposal solution here that any government, doesn't have to be Britain, can implement, and I think will solve the problems with mass immigration that we're getting all across the Western world. And do please let me know what you think of it, both people on the panel and in the audience. So stage 1, accept no asylum applications, because the whole thing is being gamed by people trying to take advantage of our goodwill. I think that that's fair enough. We can pull the rug up, say, no, actually, people are taking advantage of us. We're not accepting any new asylum applications at all. I'm afraid it's been spoilt. There are too many people mocking us. Get legal migration figures to gross remigration. So, sending more people home than we're getting in by a relatively significant margin. No welfare for foreigners. I think a lot of people are coming here for our generous welfare. It really disincentivizes people moving here if they can't then get free money from, the subjugated Anglos. Mass remigration of all foreigners with criminal convictions, either domestically, as in Britain, or abroad. So there's no point having criminals from abroad here. I think that's justifiable. The United States allegedly doesn't let people in with criminal convictions, at least, if you're going the legal route. Yeah. Thank you, Palpatine. So I think that this already has precedent. And first of all, what do you think of stage 1?
Perfectly reasonable.
Okay. So stage 2. This is where I differ with a lot of other people. I'm concerned now with the subsequent stages potentially getting some backlash. So I want to make sure that there are sufficient things in place for people to not be endangered when the criminal elements of society get angry that we're cracking down on them. Because whenever you see these crackdowns, there is an initial spike where potentially people are in danger, your average person, right? So I want to introduce capital punishment for murderers, sex criminals. That's, ones that actually go out and do horrible things. I can't name what that thing is beginning with R, because it gets flagged on lots of social media platforms. And nonces, practicing nonces. I think that those 3, I think it's fair for all of society to give them the death penalty. And we also need to rethink the severity of punishments. I think that this is something that needs to happen, because the punishments for certain crimes just seem far too low, to my mind.
As we've seen with the Hugh Edwards case, there's been massive outrage over the fact that he only received a 6-month suspended sentence. And indeed, another, I'm going to not use the P word because that also gets flagged, but another nonce who had over 1 million, I believe it was, images and videos and things, also did not receive any jail time recently.
It's ridiculous.
So this is the point at which we go, what we define as cruel and unusual punishment perhaps needs a reassessment for this particular caseload.
Well, it seems to me that people are more concerned about the rights of the prisoners than the population that you're meant to be using the justice system to protect.
Well, first and foremost, the prison system itself is a defence of the public against the reoffending criminal, and the use of capital punishment is just an extension of that. Really.
Exactly. There are some people who cannot be rehabilitated ever. And I think
nor should they be given the option, because they have violated our social contract to such an extent that capital punishment is the appropriate response.
And another thing that I think is really important with crime as it is, give people the legal right to defend themselves. So in Britain, here is West Yorkshire Police saying the only fully legal self-defense product at the moment is alarm. So I accidentally said the word, but never mind. You can be like, I'm having this bad thing happen to me. Here's an alarm. That's not a defense. You can't.
This is our CCTV nation equivalent of we're watching whilst you get assaulted. But we might chase them up afterwards, but it does nothing to actually deter.
So Americans, I think, are much better positioned in this sort of thing. This is why I think actually America is much better off in recovering from lots of these problems, as well as their much healthier economy than a lot of Europe. But I think that lots of European countries have laws like this that view pepper spray being carried by women to defend themselves against these people. That is seen as just as equally punishable as carrying a firearm. That is ridiculous. I think that it's perfectly legitimate to carry these things for your own safety. And I think actually I would like to see people be able to carry weapons for their own personal defense, obviously following the US's lead on that one, because I think it's important. And in fact, there have been petitions. Here's one: make it legal to carry non-lethal self-defense weapons, like I think it was pepper spray and tasers. And the government response to this was, the government is taking determined action to make our streets safer, but sprays containing noxious substances are dangerous and we have no plans to allow people to carry them for self-defense.
They're supposed to be dangerous.
Yes. The government here is saying we're going to continue to import thousands upon thousands, if not millions, of foreigners who are more likely to commit this on the native population, and we're more worried about their health than yours. That's what is effectively being said here, and I find it infuriating. So moving on to stage 3, this is a very important one. Disassociate with any supranational organisation that would interfere with lawfare. So things like the United Nations have the 1951 Refugee Convention, which prevents countries from deporting or returning refugees to places where many of them might face danger, which is ill-defined. They talk about, we're worried they might be tortured for their crimes. And the Pakistanis pull this one out, like, I've been convicted of sex crime and I'm worried that I might be tortured if I get sent back to Pakistan. Boo-hoo, you shouldn't have done it.
Oh, this was one of the arguments they were making against the Rwanda plan as well. Not that the Rwanda plan was ever meant to work, but the whole point was that, Rwanda might be dangerous for them.
Mm-hmm. But there are lots and lots of these supranational organisations, NGOs, things like that, that will try and interfere. And, of course, the UK, as well, as a specific example, remains a member of the Council of Europe, even though we left the EU, because it's a separate thing. And that has the European Convention on Human Rights. And Article 8 has the right to a family life. And so lots of people can say, but I have a family member in this country, and I don't want to be separated from them. And this can be basically used against us, and there are lots of these articles in these supranational organisations that are basically used to subjugate the native populations.
Also, domestically, we have the Dubs Amendment, which allows refugees who have been granted asylum to bring their entire families,
which is ridiculous.
Which just means that they act as anchors.
Yes, so we need to leave all of those to make it possible. Stage 4: allocate funding to hire staff to enact mass remigration, find the illegals already here, every single one of them, and deport them all. Mass remigration of all foreign financial net negatives, which is the vast majority from my reading of the data. Send back all who have claimed refuge here if their country is not currently at war. And this is specifically women, children, and the elderly, who are not problem cases. Young men, even if their country is at war, should be sent back. Why do we want people who fled their country in its time of need? We don't want cowards. Thank you. That's what those men are. They're not refugees. They're cowards. They didn't fight for their country. They didn't make it a better place. They fled. And women, children, elderly can stay until their country is safe, and then we can send them back. They're not the ones causing problems. And then stage 5, we carry out trials of those who imposed this on us in the first place. We were never asked. We voted against it at every given opportunity. This is a crime against the people of Europe and North America, and people should have to pay for it. I think that is perfectly reasonable, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yes. I also think that at the end of this process, abolishing the concept of dual citizenship, and thus incurring a much larger cost, essentially, both spiritually and as well as physically, essentially, to become part of us is there, and that possibly the only way to become a citizen from a foreign nation is through marriage. That would also be an option that's there, with, of course, a new set of laws about how people get married, to avoid the green card situation in America. But other than that, what you said sounds pretty reasonable as far as I'm concerned, and I'd be happy with that, yes.
Well, thank you. What do you think, Harry?
Will you be standing at the next election?
No. However, I think that if we refine this blueprint, we figure out all the kinks, and we just say, this is what we want, and we won't be happy till we get it, and keep on hammering it home, it's at least something tangible to say, this is what X amount of people want.
Realistically, any party that claims to be for the protection of Britain and regenerating the country into something that can call itself great again should be taking those kinds of policies and using them as a blueprint.
But thankfully, there are lots of parties across Europe and potentially North America as well that may well be able to push this sort of thing, right? America at least has the capital punishment and the self-defense side of things. The other stuff, not so much, but you see Trump assume office, perhaps these sorts of things might start happening. So there is potential. I don't see it necessarily coming anytime soon in Britain, but elsewhere I can see it catching on more. But I think talking about the concrete ways we can do it makes it seem a lot more possible, because people saying this is impossible, this is an insurmountable task. No, it's not. There are things that can be done to solve this.
There's also precedent, India did remigrate over 100,000 of the British when the Raj collapsed.
Well, Iran is about to remigrate 2 million Afghans, sorry.
Eisenhower, with less than 1,000 people with Operation Slur, which I can't say, managed to get 2 million people out of America in the 50s. And
well, there we go.
That's when the technology was much more primitive. We have much better technology for clearing them out these days.
It is possible. There we go.
Hi folks, hope you enjoyed that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters. If you did, go over to lotuseaters.com, sign up, support us, only £5 a month. That's how we keep the lights on. And go and watch our Lads Hour, which is like The View for Men, in which this one the lads are discussing the classic film, Hot Fuzz. It's amazing, you'll love it. And while you're at it, go over to X, formerly Twitter, and follow us at lotuseaters_com.